Dawn crept over the shattered village of Stonne on 16 May 1940, the light weak and colorless, filtering through a haze of dust and burning timber. Roofless cottages stood like broken ribs against the sky. The air smelled of cordite and churned earth. German infantry moved cautiously through the ruins, boots crunching on glass, rifles shouldered toward the dark alleys still holding the promise of French resistance. Somewhere beyond the village edge, a deeper sound stirred, low, metallic, and rhythmic, a sound that did not match the small Panzers the Germans were used to facing. It was heavier, slower, more deliberate, a heartbeat made of steel. Moments later, a massive shape emerged from the smoke, squat, armored like a fortress. Its riveted plates were streaked with soot. Its engine growled with the slow certainty of something built to endure punishment rather than evade it. It was the French B-1 bis, Eure, commanded by Captain Pierre Billotte, a tank many German crews had mocked only days earlier as a lumbering, obsolete relic, a moving bunker, a tin can. Yet as it rolled toward the village, it carried the weight of a continent in collapse and the capacity to rewrite the assumptions of an invading army. And to understand how this moment came to be, we must return to the weeks that set the stage for Stonne. In early May 1940, the map of Western Europe was beginning to twist into a shape few in the French High Command could comprehend. For months, Allied planners believed they understood the German method of war. Probing attacks, limited armor pushes, cautious advances reminiscent of the First World War. But what broke across the borders of Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands on 10 May was something different. It was faster, coordinated, and brutally focused. The German High Command called it Fall Gelb, Case Yellow. History would come to know it as the decisive opening act of the Battle of France. As German armor columns thundered through the Low Countries, the Allied armies executed the plan they had rehearsed for decades, a rapid advance into Belgium to meet what they believed would be the main German thrust. This was the strategy of the Dial Plan, built on assumptions formed long before Blitzkrieg tactics took shape. The French poured some of their best armored and motorized units northward, confident that the Ardennes forest to the south was too dense, too narrow, too unsuitable for large-scale tank movement. That belief lasted only a few days. By 13 May, the truth was undeniable. The Germans had forced crossings at the Meuse. Armored units, including fast Panzer divisions, had poured out of the Ardennes like water bursting through a dam. French defenses at Sedan buckled under the pressure of concentrated bombing and coordinated assault. Communications faltered. Units were cut off. Across headquarters maps, the front line began to ripple in directions that defied traditional thinking. The French army was not lacking in bravery nor in equipment, rather it suffered from a doctrine that had calcified over 2 decades. Orders moved slowly. Units operated in isolation. Armor rarely fought as independent, decisive formations. Instead, tanks were often parceled out to support infantry, diluting the impact of their firepower. Meanwhile, the German Panzer divisions advanced as integrated fists, armor, infantry, artillery, and aircraft operating as one. As the breakthrough widened near Sedan, German forces sought to secure the approaches through the Ardennes and consolidate their route toward the coast. One crucial node in this network of hills and ridges was the small, otherwise unremarkable village of Stonne. Perched on commanding ground, overlooking roads vital to German supply lines, Stonne became a key objective for both sides, small on a map, enormous in tactical importance. It was toward this burning, battered cluster of houses that French armored reinforcements were rushed. Among them, the 3rd Armored Division, 3 DCR, equipped with the heavy B-1 bis tanks, machines that embodied a completely different philosophy of armored warfare. Where German panzers emphasized speed and operational mobility, the B-1 bis embodied the French belief in the methodical battle. It was a land battleship, thickly armored, heavily armed, designed to punch through fortified lines rather than chase fast-moving columns. To many German tankers, who had observed the B-1 bis only from intelligence reports and propaganda briefings, it appeared primitive, too slow, too fuel-hungry, overly complicated with its dual-gun layout, a 75mm hull gun and a 47mm turret gun. They called it a relic, a cumbersome tin can from an outdated doctrine. On paper, the B-1 bis should not have been a threat to fast-moving Blitzkrieg formations. But paper did not account for what would happen in close quarters, on the twisted streets of a French village under the command of a man who understood what his tank could do when unleashed. Captain Pierre Billotte, a veteran officer known for his calm under pressure, found himself and his tank, B-1 bis number 217, christened Eure, committed to the increasingly desperate struggle for Stonne. The Germans sought to seize the village completely. The French were determined to hold it or retake it, no matter how many times the lines shifted. Over the course of the battle, Stonne would change hands more than 17 times, earning its later nickname, the Verdun of 1940. On 16 May, the 10th Panzer Division and infantry from Infantry Regiment Großdeutschland pressed another assault into the village. Confident after days of rapid advances, their panzers, primarily Panzer IIIs and IVs, had proven lethal against most Allied tanks they had encountered so far. Their crews had been trained to expect mechanical frailty from French armor, slow reaction times, and limited tactical coordination. But what approached Stonne that morning would challenge every one of those assumptions. The French command ordered a counterattack to blunt the German foothold. Among the armored vehicles preparing to move was Billotte's B-1 bis. It rumbled into formation, its engine thundering beneath layers of riveted steel, its crew of 4 sealed in a cramped, overheated compartment. The village ahead had already changed hands multiple times in the previous day, and thick smoke still lingered where artillery had crashed through roofs and walls only hours earlier. And as Billotte advanced toward the outskirts of Stonne, the stage was set for a confrontation that would defy expectations on both sides and etch the name Eure into the history of armored warfare. By the morning of 16th May 1940, the village of Stonne resembled a landscape carved by artillery and fire. Stone walls stood scorched and jagged. Roadways were cratered, littered with shattered wagons and abandoned rifles. Every inch of the ground bore signs of violent possession, the Germans pushing in, the French counterattacking, the lines swinging back and forth through the same streets again and again. The village had become a pivot point in the German thrust westward, a small but critical ridgeline they needed to secure to maintain momentum toward the French interior. The units holding Stonne that morning belonged to elements of the 10th Panzer Division, reinforced by elite infantry from Infantry Regiment Großdeutschland. Their vehicles, Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs, were not the thin-skinned light tanks of 1939, but more capable machines mounting 37mm or short 75mm guns. Against most Allied armor deployed so far, these weapons had proven more than adequate. German tankers approached Stonne with confidence shaped by success. They had already crushed Belgian armored cars, outmaneuvered Dutch defenses, and pushed aside many French light tanks whose armor cracked under sustained fire.
Yet what they faced in Stonne was different. The French were deploying their heaviest armor, the B-1Bs, designed not for rapid operations, but for direct assault and close combat. At roughly 31 tons, the B-1Bs outweighed every German tank on the field. Its armor reached up to 60 millimeters, far thicker than the majority of German guns could reliably penetrate at typical engagement ranges in 1940. And unlike the multi-crew turret systems used by Germany, the B-1Bs housed a unique dual-weapon layout, a hull-mounted 75mm howitzer controlled by the driver, and a turret-mounted 47mm SA-35 gun operated by the commander. This layout demanded extraordinary coordination inside the tank. The commander, already burdened by target spotting, loading, firing, and communication, worked almost to the limits of human capacity. Critics argued the B-1Bs was over-engineered, too slow to reload, prone to fuel consumption issues, and difficult to maintain in the field. But the French design philosophy had not aimed for elegant ergonomics or strategic mobility. It had aimed for one thing: overmatch at the point of contact. And in close quarters, where maneuver was restricted, the B-1Bs could become something terrifying. Captain Pierre Billotte, commanding the B-1Bs Eure, understood this balance intimately. Born into a military family, he embodied the quiet, steady professionalism often found in officers who had spent years observing the evolving nature of warfare. He was neither flamboyant nor impulsive. His leadership style centered on calm decisiveness, a trait his crew relied upon as tensions around Stonne grew. Inside the armored battle group preparing for the French counterstroke, crews were exhausted. The fighting for Stonne had dragged on relentlessly, and tank maintenance was a constant battle against heat, dust, and vibration. The B-1Bs required meticulous attention. Its engine consumed fuel voraciously, its suspension strained under the tank's massive weight, and its dual-gun operation demanded constant coordination. Yet despite these limitations, crews knew its armor could withstand a level of punishment few other tanks in 1940 could endure. The French plan for the upcoming counterattack was simple: push the Germans out of Stonne once more, disrupt their advance, and buy precious time for reorganizing defenses behind the collapsing lines near the Meuse. Infantry would follow behind armor, supported by artillery firing from the surrounding heights. What the plan lacked, however, was the broader operational context the German High Command had mastered. While the French saw each counterattack as a standalone effort, the Germans viewed the entire region as a single, fluid battlefield, shifting units rapidly to exploit gaps. That morning, German forces were already preparing for their next push. Infantry squads moved through cellars and half-ruined houses, establishing firing lines. Machine gun teams occupied windows facing the French approach. Panzer crews warmed their engines, confident that their superior mobility and sharper coordination would break yet another French counterstroke. Many had heard stories of the slow, fuel-greedy French heavy tanks. Some joked that the B-1Bs was a mobile furnace, a tank that cooked its crew long before it reached its target. But not all German officers dismissed the French armor so easily. Intelligence reports, though often drowned out by optimism, noted that the B-1Bs could resist most German tank guns at ranges under 300 meters. Still, these warnings seemed distant compared to the rapid victories unfolding elsewhere on the front. As the French armored column rolled toward Stonne, Eure moving steadily within the formation, the battlefield ahead was erupting once more. Shells burst against the outer ridges, sending debris cascading down the slopes. German observers radioed sightings of new French armor approaching from the south. The stage was tightening, the lines drawing closer, and every crew on both sides sensed that the next clash would be decisive. And as Billotte's tank neared the village perimeter, its armor glinting beneath the smoke-filled morning sun, the confrontation that would stun an entire Panzer division was moments from beginning.
Angle 1. Tactical view. The struggle for Stonne was a clash defined not simply by firepower, but by the contrasting tactical philosophies of two armies. The Germans approached every engagement as part of a broader operational design. Armor, infantry, artillery, engineers, and aircraft worked as an integrated system, each supporting the others with speed and precision. Panzer divisions, in particular, operated as cohesive offensive instruments, fast, flexible, and intent on creating confusion within enemy lines. The French, by contrast, adhered to a doctrine shaped by the First World War. Their armored brigades were composed of powerful machines but lacked the freedom to act independently. Orders traveled through rigid channels. Counterattacks were often punctual and deliberate, executed as isolated events rather than coordinated operational maneuvers. Stonne became a microcosm of this disconnect. From a tactical vantage, the German presence in the village on 16 May represented both an opportunity and a vulnerability. The village sat on elevated ground that offered excellent observation of the surrounding valleys and road networks. Holding it meant controlling the approaches to the entire Sedan sector. But occupying the village also forced German armor into tight streets where maneuvering was restricted and lines of sight were short. For most tanks, this confined space was a liability. But for the B-1 bis, built for frontal engagements and survivability, these narrow confines acted as a force multiplier. Its slow acceleration mattered little when distances were measured in meters rather than kilometers. Its thick armor negated the advantage of German 37mm guns. Its 75mm hull gun, difficult to use at long range, became devastating at street corner distance. From a purely tactical perspective, the French counterattack that morning aimed to retake the village and disrupt the German foothold. But in execution, it became something different, an encounter in which one tank, positioned at exactly the right place, operated in an environment that magnified its strengths and minimized its weaknesses. Billotte's Eure did not simply drive into Stonne, it entered a tactical context that would allow it to perform beyond any expectation held by either side. And the tactical dynamics of Stonne were shaped by something even deeper: the technological contrasts that defined early 1940s armored warfare. Angle 2. Technological view. To understand why a single B-1 bis could achieve such a dramatic effect, one must first understand the technological gap, not between France and Germany, but between the intended uses of their machines. The B-1 bis was a product of interwar French military thinking, which emphasized the need for a breakthrough tank capable of punching through fortified lines. For this purpose, the B-1 bis was extraordinary. Up to 60 millimeters of armor, a hull-mounted 75mm howitzer firing high explosive shells, and a turret-mounted 47mm gun capable of penetrating most enemy tanks of 1940 at standard combat ranges. The downside was complexity. The tank required meticulous maintenance. Its engine consumed fuel at alarming rates. Its crew arrangement, especially the single-man turret, placed a near unbearable workload on the commander, who had to locate targets, load the gun, aim, fire, observe impacts, and simultaneously manage communications and crew coordination. But in close combat, where targets were obvious and reaction time mattered more than rate of fire, these limitations became manageable. German panzers, on the other hand, represented evolving doctrine: lighter armor, faster speeds, superior optics, and multi-man turrets that allowed smoother engagement cycles. Their strength lay not in armor thickness, but in coordination.
moving as units, not as individual machines. Yet German anti-tank technology in May 1940 had a crucial limitation. Most Panzer IIIs mounted a 37mm KWK-36 gun, effective against thin-skinned vehicles, but largely ineffective against the frontal armor of a B-1 bis at ranges under 300 meters. The short-barreled Panzer IV's 75mm gun was optimized for high explosive work, not armor penetration. Facing the B-1 bis head-on in a confined village was like striking an anvil with a hammer made for cutting wood. German crews were trained to exploit speed and maneuverability, not stand and trade blows. But Stonne offered little room for maneuver, and the B-1 bis demanded to be confronted directly. In that environment, technology favored the heavier machine. And if German crews underestimated the B-1 bis's potential as a tactical threat, much of that came from prior assumptions rooted in contempt as much as intelligence. Angle 3. German view. To German tank crews entering Stonne, the French heavy tanks were curious anomalies, unpredictable, cumbersome, and seemingly born of outdated doctrine. Many had heard reports of B-1 tanks breaking down during marches or needing specialized maintenance teams simply to remain operational. The German advance through Belgium and the Netherlands had reinforced this perception. French light tanks often fell prey to ambushes or mechanical failures. Some armored units had been caught unprepared, their machines abandoned when gasoline ran out or orders failed to reach them. The B-1 bis was a weapon they respected on paper but dismissed in practice. But none of this prepared them for what would happen when one of those tin cans, a tank they expected to outmaneuver, outthink, or simply outlast, appeared not as a straggler, but as the spearhead of a determined counterattack. And as the German crews took up firing positions within the shattered streets of Stonne, they were about to face a reality far harsher than the briefings had ever suggested. Because the next angle, the human experience inside the steel hull of Eure, would shape everything that followed.
Angle 4. Human angle. Inside the B-1 bis, Eure, the air was already thick with fumes long before the first shot was fired at Stonne. The interior of a B-1 bis was notoriously cramped, its walls lined with machinery that radiated heat into every corner. Oil vapor, cordite residue, and the constant thrum of the engine blended into an atmosphere that demanded endurance. Even at idle, noise filled the crew's ears, a mechanical roar of pistons, gears, and grinding track links. Captain Pierre Billotte sat below the cupola, managing a workload that no modern armored commander would recognize. He alone operated the turret's 47mm SA-35 gun. He alone observed, aimed, loaded, and fired it, while directing his crew and communicating with supporting elements. His gunner was himself. His loader was himself. His commander's responsibility to understand the entire battlefield remained unchanged. It was a task that demanded extraordinary calm and discipline. The driver, positioned forward in the hull, bore another responsibility no other army expected from its drivers: control of the tank's 75mm howitzer. With foot pedals and hand levers, he steered the tank while simultaneously operating a cannon intended to blast through fortifications. Each time he fired, the recoil shook the entire hull, sending vibrations through steel plates and rattling internal components. The radio operator, squeezed into another narrow space, worked in conditions where heat frequently approached unbearable levels. Communications were limited, often unreliable, and the constant noise made deciphering calls a challenge in itself. For the crew of Eure, the physical strain of operating the vehicle was matched only by the mental intensity of combat in Stonne. They faced not open-field maneuvering, but street fighting, where threats appeared at point-blank range, often without warning. Every intersection, every gap between buildings, every collapsed wall could conceal a German anti-tank team or the barrel of a Panzer waiting for a shot. In those conditions, the human factor mattered as much as armor thickness or gun caliber. Billotte's steady voice, his patience, and his clear orders kept the crew synchronized. Under a lesser commander, the chaos of close combat, combined with the mechanical challenges of the B-1 bis, might have overwhelmed them. But inside Eure, discipline held. Even as German shells struck the armor, ringing like hammers on a cathedral bell, the crew maintained focus. Their bodies strained against heat, vibration, and noise. Their hands worked instinctively through practice drills. And as they entered the narrow streets of Stonne, they were about to discover how closely the survival of a tank depended on the endurance and will of the men inside it. Angle 5. Leadership angle. The broader battle around Sedan in May 1940 exposed painful weaknesses within the French command structure. Leaders were often constrained by layers of bureaucracy. Orders took too long to arrive. Initiative was rarely rewarded. Even highly capable officers found themselves tethered to doctrines that discouraged exploitation of momentum. But in the chaos of collapsing fronts, certain individuals recognized that strict adherence to doctrine would not hold back the German advance. Stonne became one of the rare locations where French officers, aware of the desperation of the moment, began to act with uncharacteristic autonomy. Among them was Captain Pierre Billotte. Billotte was not a loud leader nor a revolutionary thinker. His strength lay in clarity and steadiness. When the order came to retake Stonne once more, he did not wait for ideal conditions or perfect timing. He understood, with the experience of a seasoned officer, that hesitation was more dangerous than action. The enemy already held the crest. The village could not be abandoned. French armored doctrine dictated methodical coordination with infantry and artillery. But the situation on the ground had slipped beyond methodical control. Billotte recognized that the counterattack required decisiveness, not perfection. His decision to move Eure directly into the contested village, where visibility was limited and German firepower concentrated, was bold to the point of audacity. Yet it was grounded not in recklessness, but in an understanding of his tank's strengths, armor resilience, close-range firepower, and the psychological impact of a heavy machine smashing through enemy positions. Leadership in that moment meant breaking from rigid doctrine to confront reality head-on. Billotte provided the direction his men needed: calm, assertive, unshaken by the swirling collapse around them. His presence gave his crew the confidence to advance into conditions that would have terrified less seasoned soldiers. And as Eure entered the heart of Stonne, another factor began to shape the impending clash, one not measured in strategy or engineering, but in morale. Angle 6. Psychological/moral angle. Early in the Battle of France, German forces carried a momentum that felt almost unstoppable. Reports from across the front spoke of rapid advances, shattered defenses, and disorganized retreats. German tank crews entered Stonne believing that French resistance was crumbling everywhere. Confidence bordered on inevitability. They felt they were part of a tide that could not be reversed. But war is not constant motion. It is shaped by moments, brief, intense disruptions that recalibrate the psychology of those who witness them. The arrival of a B-1 bis at close range represented exactly such a disruption. For German infantry inside Stonne, the sound of Eure approaching through the smoke did not resemble the lighter French tanks they had faced before. The engine roared deeper. The tracks dug into the earth with heavier force. And when the silhouette finally broke into view, thick armor plates gleaming, weapons tracking left and right, it forced a reevaluation in seconds. The tank they had mocked as slow and obsolete was suddenly a towering, unstoppable mass pressing into the narrow streets. For German tank crews, the psychological shock was even more acute. Their shells, fired at ranges that normally devastated enemy armor, struck the B-1 bis and bounced, sparking, ricocheting, leaving only scorched paint behind. Every failed shot chipped away at confidence. Every impact that failed to penetrate undermined the belief in technological and tactical superiority. Meanwhile, for the French troops nearby, infantry who had endured hours of bombardment, the sight of Eure pushing into the village restored something their army desperately needed: a sense of agency, proof that German armor was not invincible, proof that the right equipment in the right hands could blunt the spearhead of Blitzkrieg. In Stonne, the psychological balance of the battlefield shifted in an instant. And the moment that truly shattered expectations was now approaching, when Billotte's tank rolled into the heart of Stonne and met a German armored column head-on.
The village of Stonne lay ahead like a shattered labyrinth, its streets choked with debris, its houses burned down to skeletal frames, its air filled with drifting soot and the metallic ring of recent gunfire. As Captain Pierre Billotte guided Eure closer, the sounds of German machine guns crackled from behind collapsed walls. Mortar shells thumped in the distance. Somewhere inside the village, German tanks waited, engines rumbling in the shadows. The French supporting infantry moved cautiously behind cover, but the B-1 bis advanced without pause. For Billotte, the mission was clear: retake Stonne, break the German line, and deny them the high ground that overlooked the entire sector. Every second counted. As Eure crossed the edge of the village, the engagement began abruptly. A German Panzer III appeared from behind a half-destroyed barn, its guns swiveling toward the French tank. The distance was barely 80 meters, point-blank in armored terms. The German crew fired first. The 37mm shells struck the front plate of the B-1 bis, sending a flash of sparks across the armor before bouncing away, leaving only a scorch mark. Inside Eure, the crew felt the impact as a dull hammering against steel, but nothing more. Billotte reacted instantly. He swung the turret, aimed the 47mm gun, and fired. The shot pierced the Panzer III cleanly, exiting through the rear armor in a burst of flame. The German tank lurched, smoke pouring from its hatches. But there was no time to watch it burn. As Eure pushed deeper, another Panzer III emerged at the street's far end. The German commander shouted orders, and the tank fired rapidly. One shot, then another, then a third. Each round struck the B-1 bis at shallow angles, deflecting with high-pitched clangs. Billotte answered with a single, precise shot. The second Panzer III ground to a halt. The German infantry positioned near the buildings opened fire with rifles and machine guns, their rounds pinging harmlessly off the French tank's armor. Some scrambled to bring up Panzerschreck's early predecessor, the 3.7-centimeter Pak-36 anti-tank gun, but even that weapon, rushed into place, had little effect. Its shells chipped flakes of steel, but failed to penetrate. What happened next became one of the most startling tank encounters of the campaign. A German armored column was advancing up the main street. Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs moving in a staggered formation, expecting only weak resistance. The smoke parted just enough for the lead vehicles to see the shape emerging toward them. A heavy silhouette, massive, crawling steadily forward. For a moment, both sides paused.
Then the Germans opened fire. Multiple tanks fired nearly simultaneously. Shell after shell slammed into Eure. Some rang violently against the turret, others exploded against the hull. Inside, the noise was overwhelming, like being trapped inside a cathedral struck by repeated thunderclaps. But the armor held. Billotte maintained his focus, working methodically. He fired the 47mm gun into the lead Panzer III, watching it erupt in flame. He ordered the driver to angle slightly, giving him a better line on the second target. Another shot, another kill. The German formation faltered. The Panzer IV at the rear attempted to reverse, but the narrow street offered little room. Billotte adjusted the turret again, firing into its front as the German crew frantically tried to reposition. The shot ripped through the frontal armor, igniting ammunition inside. Flames burst from the hatches. At the same time, the driver of Eure fired the 75mm gun into a building where German infantry had taken cover. The explosion tore through the structure, collapsing it in a cloud of dust. Now chaos took hold. German tanks attempted to maneuver, but damaged vehicles blocked the street. The smoke grew thicker. Crews scrambled to escape burning halls. Radio chatter became frantic as officers tried to understand why their shots were having no effect. Billotte kept advancing. Another German tank came into his sights, a Panzer III, trying to turn into a side street. Billotte fired. The shot tore into its side armor, the tank erupting into a violent burst of smoke. Even those German vehicles that managed to fire at flank angles found their shells bouncing off. The B-1 bis armor, thick and well-angled in all critical sectors, simply absorbed the punishment. Destroyed panzers littered the street behind Eure, their blackened silhouettes marking the path of its advance. As the tank continued its push, German infantry broke and ran, unable to believe what they were witnessing. A tank that would not yield. A tank absorbing bullets and shells as though immune to them. Morale cracked. Reports crackled through German radios. A schwere germanischer französischer Panzer bricht durch. A heavy French tank is breaking through. Inside Eure, the air grew hotter. Sweat dripped from the crew's faces. The interior shook with every impact, yet the tank kept moving. And ahead of them, deeper inside Stonne, more German tanks waited, unaware that the unstoppable machine closing in had already cut through the first line like a blade. What happened next would cement Eure as one of the most formidable tanks of the 1940 campaign. The deeper Eure pushed into Stonne, the more the village transformed into a crucible of fire and steel. Flames licked from the windows of ruined homes. Smoke drifted in dense curtains across narrow streets. German infantry, overwhelmed by the machine's advance, attempted to regroup at key intersections, but each time they formed resistance, the thunder of the B-1 bis's approach forced them to scatter. Billotte's tank entered the main square, a junction that had become the nerve center of the German deployment. It was here that a second German armored detachment waited, unaware that the first line had already been shattered. As Eure cleared the smoke, a Panzer IV commander spotted the French tank and shouted orders. His crew reacted instantly. They fired a high-explosive round, hoping to disable the turret or damage the tracks. The blast engulfed the front of the B-1 bis in dust and debris. When the dust settled, the French tank emerged unscathed. Billotte responded with the turret-mounted 47mm. His shot struck the Panzer IV's mentlet, ricocheted downward through its hull, and detonated internally, forcing the German crew to abandon their machine in panic. They leapt from the hatches, diving behind rubble as flames consumed their tank. Another Panzer III attempted to flank Eure, maneuvering around a fallen house. The driver of the French tank adjusted course, turning the heavy hull with deliberate, grinding precision. At close range, he fired the 75mm howitzer directly into the German tank's side. The shell hit with catastrophic force. The Panzer III collapsed inward, its turret knocked askew by the blast. Even as these tanks were destroyed, more German fire rained down on Eure. Anti-tank teams brought forward additional Pak-36 guns, attempting to set up crossfire angles. They fired hastily, some shells striking the lower hull, others glancing off the turret ring. The noise was deafening. Metal clanged, sparks erupted, and fragments whirled through the smoke. Inside, sweat ran into the eyes of the crew. The temperature climbed with every passing second. The tank felt alive, shaking under impact after impact, yet its armor continued to deflect each blow. Billotte focused through the haze, calling out targets, his voice steady despite the barrage hammering around them. Then through the intersection ahead, the crew saw something extraordinary. The remains of the German armored column stretched down the street. 2 Panzer IVs burning, several Panzer IIIs disabled, others abandoned in hasty retreat. German infantry attempted to form a defensive line behind the wreckage, but the sight of the French heavy tank advancing through the smoke broke their resolve. Some fled into alleyways, others simply froze. Billotte pressed forward. He targeted another Panzer III that had attempted to reverse behind a rubble pile. A single 47mm round struck it dead center. Smoke poured from the turret as the tank slumped to a stop. By now, the German crews were firing at every angle they could manage, aiming at hatches, vision ports, and weaker spots in the armor, but nothing penetrated. Eure rolled over debris and shattered timber, climbing onto a mound that gave Billotte a clearer line of sight over the next street. What he saw was the final cluster of German tanks attempting to withdraw. He fired again and again, methodical, unhurried, each shot finding its target. A Panzer IV at the intersection's far end attempted one last maneuver. Its turret hoped to use the narrow doorway of a collapsed chapel for partial cover while lining up a flank shot. But the move came too late. Billotte sighted the turret and fired. The shell struck with such force that the turret jammed permanently, sparks flying as the gun mantlet tore loose. Now panic spread through the remaining German lines. Their radios filled with frantic reports. "The French tank cannot be stopped. Our shells are useless. Request immediate air support." But the Luftwaffe was occupied elsewhere, hammering crossings along the Meuse and supporting the main thrust of the German advance. Stonne, for the moment, was an isolated battlefield. German infantry began retreating through the side streets, abandoning equipment as they ran. Anti-tank gunners fled their positions when Eure pivoted its massive hull in their direction. Even seasoned German NCOs struggled to maintain order under the psychological weight of the unstoppable machine. When the final German tank in view attempted to withdraw down the northern road, Billotte took aim with the 47mm. His shot hit the rear armor, and the vehicle erupted in a plume of fire. The street fell silent. 13 German tanks were destroyed or disabled in the span of minutes, more armor than many entire battalions lost in a single day of the 1940 campaign. Infantry units from Grossdeutschland reported significant casualties and widespread breakdown of cohesion. Only then did Billotte order Eure to withdraw from the village, a deliberate, controlled maneuver. The tank reversed slowly down the street it had just fought through, its armor scarred and battered. Later counts recorded over 140 impacts on the hull, none of which had penetrated. The Germans, stunned and disorganized, did not pursue. In that moment, on that Smalley Ridgeline village, the myth of German invincibility cracked. One French tank, mocked as a relic, had devastated a German armored detachment and forced an entire infantry regiment into disarray. and the consequences of that brief, violent encounter would echo far beyond the smoking ruins of Stonne.
When the smoke gradually thinned over Stonne, the first French infantry units moved cautiously through the battered streets. They stepped past collapsed stone walls, overturned carts, and the husks of vehicles still smoldering. The silence was eerie. Moments earlier, the village had echoed with the clash of engines, the snap of gunfire, and the roar of exploding ammunition. Now, only the crackle of flames remained. The first thing they saw was the trail. Behind Eure, the main road was lined with wrecked panzers, each one left where it had fallen in the chaos. Some were frozen in half-turns, others buried in rubble from buildings that had collapsed around them. A few still emitted dark plumes of smoke, staining the air with the lingering smell of burning fuel and hot metal. To the French soldiers, it felt unreal. For weeks they had heard the stories: German armor punching through the Ardennes, outmaneuvering entire divisions, overwhelming local defenses with speed and precision. The myth had grown with each report. Many believed the Panzer divisions unstoppable, more force of nature than military formation. And yet, here lay their remains. Mechanics from the 41st Tank Battalion later walked the length of the destruction. They counted impacts on Eure's armor, an estimated 140 to 150 shell strikes, all of them deflected. The hull bore deep scars, hammered plates, and gouges that exposed the raw steel. But no penetration, no breach, no fire. The tank had endured the storm. The Germans, for their part, were stunned. Reports from the Grossdeutschland Regiment noted an encounter with a heavy French tank of exceptional resistance, its armor impervious to standard anti-tank guns. Officers attempted to piece together what had happened, but eyewitness accounts varied wildly. Some claimed 2 heavy French tanks had attacked. Others insisted a full company was involved. Only later did the Germans understand the truth. It had been one machine. But the French celebration was short-lived. Though the retaking of Stonne demonstrated the raw potential of the B-1 bis and the bravery of Billotte's crew, the broader campaign was collapsing around them. Communications failed. Orders conflicted. Divisions became isolated. French armor doctrine, built around dispersed penny-packet deployment, prevented machines like the B-1 bis from delivering their full strategic impact. The battle for Stonne would continue for days, the village changing hands more than a dozen times as German pressure mounted. Each exchange left heavier destruction, deeper scars in the soil, and fewer buildings standing. But the memory of Eure's charge burned brightly in the minds of both armies. French soldiers spoke of it as a moment of vindication, proof that their armor, dismissed as obsolete or poorly designed, could match and even defeat the German panzers. It became a rare spark of pride amid a gloomy battlefield atmosphere. German soldiers, meanwhile, carried a different lesson. Their anti-tank doctrine had been built on fast-moving assaults and combined arms coordination. Seeing their shells bounce off the B-1 bis, seeing an entire column dismantled in the matter of minutes, left a psychological mark. Some officers compared the experience to facing an iron fortress that moved with unstoppable intent. Yet even this astonishing victory could not reverse the wider strategic tide. French High Command lacked the mobility to exploit the breakthrough. Reinforcements arrived slowly. German units regrouped outside the village, supported by artillery and Stuka dive bomber elements now freed from operations along the Meuse. Their pressure intensified, squeezing French positions day by day.
Still, the story spread. In scattered pockets along the front, French soldiers whispered about the tin can that had become a hammer. Mechanics marveled at the engineering that had allowed the B-1 bis to stand against a division's worth of fire. For a brief moment, in a war defined by rapid collapse, there was a sense that perhaps the enemy was not invincible. And in the center of it all stood the battered shape of Eure, its armor etched with the scars of the most violent minutes of its service. An unyielding monument to what French industry and French resolve had accomplished when everything else was falling apart. The consequences of that stand, psychological, tactical, and symbolic, would ripple far beyond the broken streets of Stonne.
The destruction inflicted by Billotte's B-1 bis on 16 May 1940 left a deep impression on the German High Command. Reports from the 10th Panzer Division were marked by astonishment and frustration. 13 tanks, most Panzer IIIs and IVs, had been destroyed or disabled by a single French vehicle. Officers noted the sheer audacity of the action and the indestructibility of the armor. One German observer later described the scene as a steel leviathan moving through the streets, impervious to our best efforts. This engagement forced a recalibration of German assumptions about French armored strength. Intelligence officers who had dismissed the B-1 bis as slow, vulnerable, and poorly coordinated now had to account for its potential at close range. Subsequent instructions emphasized avoiding frontal engagements with heavy French tanks in confined areas, a rare acknowledgement of weakness in a force otherwise confident in its tactical superiority. Yet the broader operational impact was limited. Despite Billotte's success, the Battle of France was not halted by individual heroics. German forces maintained their momentum toward Sedan and the Meuse, ultimately breaking through French defenses and driving deep into the interior. The collapse of communications, lack of reserves, and inflexibility of French command meant that tactical successes like the retaking of Stonne could not be strategically exploited. Billotte himself survived the battle and later continued to serve with distinction. Eure, heavily scarred but intact, became a symbol of resilience and ingenuity. Its story was told and retold among French crews and eventually found its way into German reports as an anomaly, a moment when skill, technology, and courage converged to defy expectations. For the German infantry and tank crews who faced Eure, the psychological consequences lingered. Encounters with French B-1 bis tanks became cautionary tales, instilling a respect that had been absent before. Officers learned to approach urban or narrow terrain with more care, understanding that even a single heavy tank could delay, disrupt, or destroy an entire company's advance if handled by a competent crew. In the immediate aftermath, Stonne itself remained contested for several days. The village changed hands multiple times, each shift leaving deeper destruction in its wake. Civilians fled or hid amid the ruins. Buildings that survived the initial assault were demolished in subsequent exchanges. The landscape became a testament to the brutal, attritional nature of close-quarters armored combat. French military historians later emphasized that Stonne, while minor in the context of the overall campaign, demonstrated the potential of concentrated heavy armor when employed decisively. The action of Eure highlighted a gap between French tank design and operational doctrine. While the B-1 bis could dominate in specific conditions, the French Army's inability to coordinate multiple vehicles in a unified assault limited its strategic utility. Nevertheless, the moral effect was significant. French troops, demoralized by the rapid German advance elsewhere, found in the battle a fleeting moment of pride.
German troops, confident in the invincibility of their armored formations, were forced to acknowledge the lethal capability of the tanks they had dismissed as obsolete. In the chaos of 1940, such moments were rare, but they revealed that even in defeat, individual courage and well-engineered machinery could produce extraordinary results. And as the French defeat in the broader Battle of France would soon overshadow Stonne, the legacy of that single night lingered in armored warfare history, a reminder that technology, human skill, and decisive leadership could converge to achieve feats far beyond expectation. From the streets of Stonne, scorched and silent once more, one truth remained clear. The tank the Germans had mocked as a tin can had, for a brief and decisive moment, crushed an entire Panzer formation. That moment would shape the perceptions of both armies and leave an indelible mark on the annals of the Second World War. In the aftermath of Stonne, the story of Eure and its crew stands as a testament to the unpredictable interplay of technology, leadership, and human courage in warfare. A single B-1 bis tank, mocked as a slow, obsolete machine, became a force capable of rewriting assumptions about armored combat. Its thick steel hull, combined with the skill and calm determination of its crew, turned what many considered a liability into an advantage, transforming the narrow streets of a small French village into a battlefield where one machine could defy an entire Panzer division. Yet the episode also underscores a broader truth. Isolated brilliance cannot always reverse the tides of war. While Eure crushed German armor in moments of concentrated intensity, the collapse of French command structures, inflexible doctrines, and the rapid advance of Blitzkrieg elsewhere meant that such victories remained tactical, not strategic. The B-1 bis at Stonne was a fleeting triumph amid a campaign defined by rapid defeat, highlighting the limits of equipment when not paired with coordinated operational doctrine. Still, the legacy of that day endures. The image of a lone tank moving through smoke and rubble, absorbing dozens of shells and emerging victorious, resonates as both a human and technological story. It reminds us that warfare is not merely a contest of numbers or speed, but of adaptation, audacity, and resolve. Captain Pierre Billotte and his crew demonstrated that mastery of one's tools, coupled with clarity of mind under pressure, can momentarily turn the improbable into reality. In a broader historical sense, Stonne offers a reflection on how assumptions in war can be shattered in an instant. The Germans had underestimated the French. The French doctrine had limited reach, yet one tank's advance disrupted expectations and left an enduring mark. Eure became more than metal and machinery. It became a symbol of resilience, courage, and the small, decisive moments that punctuate the vast sweep of history. And as the sun set over the charred streets of Stonne, it illuminated a truth that extends beyond the battlefield. Even in the darkest hours, skill, determination, and ingenuity can leave a legacy that echoes far longer than the guns themselves.